Hey, Peter, how's it going?
Good, man. How you doing?
Good to see you. So, we're seeing unbelievable leaps in our society in terms of energy, transport, food, materials, information transfer as well. We're kind of witnessing a planetary phase shift out of industrial age systemic structure. But despite the fact that we live in a post scarcity world, a lot of this is being, I don't know, chained down, kneecapped by our economic systems. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Well, as I've always said, efficiency, conservation, these are enemies of market capitalism. So the more efficient we become, the more we move towards things we could call post-scarcity, the more the system gyrates to manufacture new problems to keep money moving, right? I think it was John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s who appropriately predicted, in fact, even though people can disagree with some of his logic, he said, you know what, by the time of, around now, people probably will only work like 5 hours a week because we will have transitioned the system of appreciating a post-scarcity lifestyle where people don't need to all live in mansions. There will be a basic sense of egalitarianism, a basic consideration of others, a basic consideration for the planet, and then everyone will have a balanced life using technology efficiently. This is after the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of people were theorizing this kind of thing. But no, people like Edward Bernays came into the corporate structure, commercial advertising, decided to pervert everything. And not just because for money and profit in the explicit sense of gain, but because that's what the system requires. It's an infinite growth system. So the more efficiency we create, the more you have to compensate for the loss of sales because of that efficiency.
As we fly past planetary boundaries for sustaining life, you point to the main cause being not just capitalism, but market economics in general. Can you explain?
Sure. As a matter of semantics, I would say that people that use the term capitalism are talking about an institutionalization of a larger systemic process, and that is the dynamics of market economics. Market economics grows and manifests as a complex system with different permutations, and capitalism as we see it is kind of a snapshot. So, we get that out of the way. But at the core of this, capitalism is an institution, but the actual system function is economic trade through markets and all the dynamics that go with that. And that is, once again, an infinite growth, insane system that has no compatibility with the ecosystem. Is an infinite growth system that needs constant consumption that is based on the premise of trying to do something about scarcity. So if you can wrap your head around that, it's one of the more mind-blowing paradoxes of the system, because it's based on scarcity, which means we don't have enough to go around, and this basic ethos that accepts inequality, that accepts poverty and all of that. But yet, simultaneously, it says, but we need constant consumption to make it work, because that's what the machine needs, like the pedal on a car. The constant consumption is the gas in the engine of market economics or capitalism. And therein lies the fundamental sickness, the fundamental dysfunction, I should say, of the system that we have to move out of, particularly for the environment. There's no hope for the environment as long as the system persists. It doesn't matter how you regulate it. The actual system function is an infinite growth cancerous phenomenon. Cancer is the best analogy to this. Mm-hmm. It just keeps dividing and opening and expanding, and that's all it knows how to do. And you can try to get people in there to close this down and have regulation for this, but what is the core MO of the system? Mm-hmm. Buying and selling, and the naivety to think that we would not buy and sell, politicians, legislation, policy is just that, utterly naive. Everything is for sale in this system. That's been the general evolution of the entire thing. You had kind of restrictions during the FDR period. You have other countries that do things a little bit more maturely, but everything moves toward the same basic direction. We're going to buy and sell literally everything. We're going to make a marketized society. It's not a market economy, it's a market culture and a market society. And the more this evolution continues, which is exactly what's happening now, as we see, especially in the United States, the more any regard for the ecosystem is pushed to the side, because it is hindering economic growth. And the system will not tolerate any hindrance of economic growth. Every particle, every cell in the being of the entire global society will eventually agitate toward stopping anything that inhibits economic growth. And any kind of conservation is thrown out the window. For the first time in human history, we've never experienced the kind of environmental crises we have now. It's because of the system, of course. And now we see this clamoring to try and clamp things down for the sake of future generations and livability of the planet. But that more than ever is now having the largest degrowth effects, and which is why, once again, it's not going to work. It's a brick wall. And the only thing we can do is to remove the system before it basically kills all of us.
Yeah, I call that that kind of endless movement towards that endpoint, the gravity of capitalism, and I'm sure I'm not the first to call it that.
Sure.
Last question. In order to create the systemic change we need, you talk about in-system and out-system activism. Can you explain what they are and why certain kinds of activism don't actually create real change?
It's simple. In-system activism assumes the channels of democracy as we know it will work within the confines of the overarching capitalist system and the power system that comes from that. Because it's not just the actual mechanics, the procedure of the system, or the inequalities. All of that translates into power dynamics. It's a hierarchy-producing system, and the power system is just as important to recognize. Capitalism is a system of power, and people often forget that. So if you go about your activism unaware of that, and you just sort of believe that the moral aptitude of your politicians, which are funded largely by lobbyists, and I don't mean just in the United States, but I mean globally, or they're involved in cartels, if you look at, or oligarchs, I should say, like Russia or China, all the basic dynamics are still there in terms of the power imbalance. And the more people go up that ladder of hierarchy, the more power they get, the more they're rewarded by the system, the less, on average, in probability, they're going to be willing to do anything to move against their benefit of both power and wealth. And that's basically what's happened. So activists can't think that way. They can't think they're going to change their society or the world through traditional channels within the system. You've got to go outside, and you have to be willing to attack the very system and to build out contrary systems or contrary attributes of a system, such as things like open source, such as, instead of being fearful of technological unemployment, seeing it as a wonderful benefit for humanity. Changing all the incentive structures, in other words. You have to want a society based on sharing. You want an access society as opposed to a property society. And when you put all that together, it's a completely different value system and a completely different set of demands. And you hope that those demands can coalesce into a new model. And ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, after all these years of doing this kind of work, I no longer, as I said earlier to you before, do I believe in trying to appeal to power. We have to try, but it's not going to be the end. We have to build out new systems. The beauty of technology today, through what's called ephemeralization, doing more and more with less and less, is that we can create pockets now of people living very differently in small communities, or I should say communities that are shared in networks, node communities. They can be anywhere in the world, but they're doing things differently. They're starting to engineer their own system of economics. And this is a project I call Integral, and we can talk more about that as it's developed. I've talked about this a great deal on my podcast. If anyone wants to learn about it, I go into a great deal about the structure of it in episode 53 of my last podcast, Revolution Now. So out-system activism means ultimately building literally a new system from the ground up, strategically, where you want to suck all of the energy from the existing system, get people to realize that they can live differently, in an egalitarian system where people aren't dying on the streets. And we can do that, sucking people away from the current system, starving the beast, as it were. And that's the core of what I mean by out-system activism.
That sounds good. Let's do that.
Let's just do that.
Let's do that. Peter, thank you so much. And always appreciate talking to you, and always learning a lot from your podcasts and books. So.
Likewise, man, and good luck on the new show. I hope it goes really well. It's really great, the episodes I've seen so far.
Thanks so much, man.